months, it's not enough.
Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Part 4 does deal with enforcement in particular and other matters, and as colleagues have said, enforcement is just one component of this legislation, and enforcement is what happens when the other aspects have failed, really. It's what happens when the proactive efforts to work alongside employers to build good health and safety practices, when the efforts of the workers and their representatives, when they're allowed to have them, to build good health and safety systems and to build a good relationship with the employer falls down. That's when enforcement has to happen. And actually, I do want to walk through some of the enforcement options that are available to the health and safety inspectors. Because what we often hear, particularly from the farming community, who seem to sort of be most vocal about this, is that the only time they see WorkSafe is when they show up to issue them with one of the enforcement notices, an improvement notice, a prohibition notice, a non-disturbance notice or a suspension notice that are available to them under this legislation. Now, of course, that's not how we want WorkSafe to operate. We want WorkSafe to be in there alongside the employers, particularly those high-risk and isolated industries like farming, like forestry, like fishing, actually out there working alongside them to get good practice in place before they have to show up with the big sticks that are available to them here in Part 4. But that comes down to a variety of things. One of them is actually ensuring that WorkSafe has the resources, has the people on the ground, and has the resources available to it to be proactive. And if WorkSafe is under-resourced, then of course the only time they're going to show up is after something has gone wrong to issue one of these notices. Nevertheless, there is a sliding scale in here, and I think it's important for people to understand that there is actually a sliding scale, and even when you get into these matters of enforcement, you're not immediately being slapped with fines. You're not immediately being slapped with notices requiring you to stop what you're doing, depending on the nature of the breach. So the first thing is improvement notices. Now, improvement notices can be given by an inspector who believes that a person is contravening a provision of this Act or regulations, or is likely to contravene this Act or its associated regulations. And the improvement notice it requires the person to remedy the contravention, and to remedy the things or activities causing the contravention or likely to cause a contravention. In other words, it says to a PCBU, look, this is going wrong. This is a breach or is likely to cause a breach of the Act. We want you to sort it out, and we're going to give you time to sort it out. In fact, it's a requirement of this legislation. It's a requirement of clause 124, in fact, that the improvement notice give the PCBU a period of time to sort out whatever's going wrong. And it's only if, after that period of time, they haven't sorted things out, that they then become liable for the fines associated with non-compliance that are laid out in clause 125. So the first option for a health and safety inspector who sees something going wrong isn't to go directly to fines, isn't to go directly to prosecution, but to actually say to the PCBU, you need to fix this, here's the opportunity to fix it, here in fact are some recommendations for how you can fix it, and here's how long you have. And we'll be back after that period of time to come and see how you're doing. If WorkSafe is doing their job properly, of course, they'll also work alongside the employer to support them to sort the issue out. The next option that's available is a prohibition notice. Now, this actually says that the employer has to stop an aspect of the work. So this is an advance on the position of the improvement notice. This says actually you're doing something so serious you need to stop that right now. Stop now, and only once you've sorted out can that particular aspect of the workplace start working again. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Lees-Galloway.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
I've called Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would have hated to have been cut off at that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the next option is to issue a prohibition notice, which actually says, so you've got to stop what you're doing. But then again, if you stop that work, sort the issue out, the inspector comes back, can see that the issue has been sorted out, then work can start again. So it's not about going immediately to the big stick. But this part 4 is about enforcement. And what we would say on this side of the House is actually preventative measures should have started well before we get anywhere near any of these notices, whether it be a prohibition notice, whether it be a non-disturbance notice, or even a suspension notice. And that is where the health and safety representatives can be really important, because we do only have 300 health and safety inspectors. Now that might sound like a large number. It still doesn't meet the International Labour Organisation guidelines for how many health and safety inspectors we should have. And let's face it, the New Zealand economy, we've heard a number of times from the Minister, in fact, how agriculture is the largest employer of people in New Zealand. And what we have with agriculture is we have a large number of workplaces with usually small numbers of workers in quite isolated situations. The same with forestry, the same with fishing. Some of our highest risk industries, the ones that kill and maim more people than any other industries, are often the hardest to reach. And this is the challenge for the inspectors, is that actually if they're to carry out their duties under Part 4 of this legislation, they have to be in many places at the same time. And that's the value of having people within the workforce who are trained and mandated to actually be the eyes and ears for WorkSafe, so that some of that preventative work can be done before we need to get to this point of issuing improvement notices, prohibition notices, or non-disturbance notices, sir. So, although this particular part is about enforcement, we just see it as I think Phil Goff said, it's one leg on the three-legged stool, and this leg is, it's reasonably robust. We are putting to one side the SOP that I have put up around the issue of private prosecutions. Otherwise, we're reasonably comfortable with this part, but it is undermined by the failings in other parts of the legislation, sir. But even with the enforcement in this, there is still an opportunity for PCBUs who have perhaps fallen foul of this part of the bill, who have not met their obligations under this bill, to rectify that well before they get anywhere near fines, well before they get anywhere near court proceedings, sir. And I think that's an important point to make, because there has been a lot of myth-making about what this legislation does. There is a lot of concern, there is a lot of fear out there amongst some of those industries, particularly those high-risk industries, that the first time they see a WorkSafe vehicle driving up their driveway, they're about to be slapped with a fine. And that shouldn't be the case. The case should be actually that WorkSafe arrives on farm or at the forest or at the fishing vessel or any other workplace for that matter, well before they get to this point. But even if they do come on farm and they see a breach of the Act, there is ample opportunity for the employer to rectify the things that are going wrong well before they risk being fined or being prosecuted. And I don't think that is well enough understood, and I think that's a failing of the government in its communication around this legislation, that it has allowed that fear-mongering to occur. It's allowed that concern to grow and grow and grow amongst particularly small employers, that they are at risk of being slapped with very large fines and will not have the opportunity to put things right. And that is simply wrong. And I would like the government, sir, to say that a lot more loudly than they have been.
I call Tim McIndoe.
I move